Hi, Gerhard Bloom here, once again looking at the tyranny and the delusions of the social justice movement. So, in case you've been living under a rock, there's a battle in the schools over books. And each side is accusing the other of engaging in book burning. Right? So, on the right, the conservatives, and the morally right, there are parents who are demanding that schools remove this toxic sex and gender ideology from the schools. And, a great move in that front was in Florida, and the banning of this ideology and these books from kindergartners to grade 3. And as I've mentioned before, the only mistake was not to ban it in its entirety. And book burning, book banning, hey, this is poisonous nonsense. Canada, the United States, you've got a right to read what you want to read and expose your kids to this toxic nonsense. Not in the schools. Those are publicly funded institutions, and this poison has no place in them. I don't believe in banning books. These books aren't banned, but they're banned in the schools, and quite rightly. On the other side, the left, or like I like to consider them, the wrong, they have this. They're absolutely morally confused on a number of issues. For the sake of sensitivity, they are banning To Kill a Mockingbird. To Kill a Mockingbird, right? It's a deeply important novel. I've read it, and it is, according to some, triggering because it's got the N-word in it. And leftists, I don't know how many of them actually read the book. It's a deeply sensitive book discussing important social issues, but somebody might be offended by the N-word. And the other one that gets excised is Huckleberry Finn. And I remember sitting in a philosophy class with, deluded leftists. This young woman thought the book was racist because, yes, it has the N-word in it. Now, I don't want to get too far down into the philosophical weeds here, but Hegel has a very famous master-slave dialectic in his Phenomenology of Spirit. So he was responding in large part to Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant famously argued that we have the noumenal world and the phenomenal world, and human cognition is limited by our innate cognitive mechanisms to see the world in terms of the phenomenal world, the world as it exists for us, for our cognition. And we have no access to what the world is in itself. For Hegel argued that the in itself of the object is an in itself for us, right? So you have a concept of an object, our understanding of that object, and you have the object as it is in itself. And through the course of inquiry, we gain a better, more thorough understanding of the object until the concept matches the object, right? That's the ideal. So this relatively abstract idea is played out in Huckleberry Finn. And for those of you who have the historical interest, this very much influenced Marx, the Marxist dialectic. Right, where the slave, in this case, gaining his freedom was the proletariat, right? But at any rate, I think Hegel was onto something profoundly important. So back to Huckleberry Finn. At the start of the novel, Huckleberry Finn sets out on his journey, and he's accompanied by Jim, a runaway slave. Now, what's important here is that not only does Jim read, not only does Huck read Jim under the category of slave, so does Jim, right? That's the socially available concept that both Jim and Huck read Jim's identity through. Jim doesn't believe himself to be a free and equal human being. right? He believes himself to be a slave. He just does not want to be a slave, to remain under the servitude, right? He doesn't like it, but he doesn't profoundly disagree with the concept, right? Through the course of the journey, there's this realization on the part of both Huck and Jim that the concept of slave is utterly inadequate to capture the innate and intrinsic dignity of Jim, right? The concept doesn't meet the object, right? And the object here is a human being. I get that, but you understand my deeper point, right? Slave is not an adequate concept for a human being, right? This is the book that they want to ban because there's the N-word. Now, I would be hard-pressed to find anybody who would be deeply offended by the N-word. I'm quite a huge fan of Jay-Z. Now, if uttering the N-word was a crime, Jay-Z would be serving life without parole, right? So, no, the N-word, is not going to break some child down into tears, and it's important for historical understanding, and it's great literature. So, no, should not be banned from the classroom. The other issue is that we need to make room for more Black voices and Black perspectives, right? Now this suggests, this goes back to this whole African American idea, right? African American. No, this is utter nonsense. Yes, Elon Musk, he's African American. He actually was born in Africa and moved to the United States, so arguably he's an African American. LeBron James, no, he's Black American. He's Black American. Back in the 1970s, there was this dashiki nonsense with the colorful shirts, purportedly, blacks capturing their African culture. Well, there's no African culture, right? This is stupid, right? Africa has many varied and different cultures, plural, multiple. Right, and they share very little similarities and overlap, particularly when you get far removed from one cultural group and one ethnic group to another. Right, so it's absolute nonsense. Glenn Loury, who's an economist, a brilliant man. I listen to his podcast regularly, and he often has on. John McWhorter, who's a brilliant scholar. If you read my book, I cite him several times. His books, Winning the Race and Losing the Race, will deeply inform my understanding of this oppression narrative nonsense. But at any rate, in one of their dialogues, John McWhorter and Glenn Loury, they're discussing this, and Glenn Loury quite rightly points out that Western European civilization, its cultural achievements, are his as much as they are mine, right? He is a Black American, and he has every right to claim the cultural inheritance of Western civilization. Those great books written by dead white men are his cultural inheritance as much as they are mine. And so the universities and the high schools are shoving these dead white authors and thinkers out of the way so they can make room for utterly marginal figures. Now, and don't get me wrong, there's some serious Black scholars and writers. I've read several of Toni Morrison's books. I thought I was quite impressed by them. And Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man, a deeply important book. It has earned its place at the table. But no, we should not be banning Shakespeare or Goethe or Dostoevsky. These are important writers. They're part of the cultural legacy of the West, and they're important. Along that vein, there was an author, sorry, I forget his name. He wrote a book. He's a black man, a black journalist, covering news in Africa. In 1997, he came out with the book, Out of America, A Black Man Confronts Africa. So he thought returning to Africa, to the place of his roots, would somehow be revelatory for him, right? Now, he was born and raised in the United States, but returning to country of origin. And reflect for a moment. You go back far enough, we all came from Africa, right? So he goes to Africa, thinks it'll be revelatory and deeply meaningful. And what he found was alienation, right? This continent was not his own. Was not his own. It shocked him, the levels of tribal violence, the callous disregard for members of different tribes, the violence, the poverty, and no, he recognized that America was his home, and he is right. Now, jazz is American. It is not African. I'm a huge fan of jazz, and jazz originated in the black community, but there's João Gilberto out of Brazil. Jazz has had a global impact and influenced countless numbers of people. It is not black. It is American culture, and black musicians played a tremendous role in spreading this around the world. And so, we have to think very clearly about these issues. Telling black students that their history is African. It is not African, it's American. They have every right to the cultural legacies of the United States and to Western civilization. And instead of alienating them from their own identities. This leads to some deep confusion and deep resentment and fosters nothing but misunderstandings. I hope you will check out my book, Deconstructing Social Justice. It's available on Amazon. It's important, not because I wrote it because the issues are important. And if you like the video, please drop a thumbs up and subscribe. Right? Spaces are running out fast. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.